My name is Laura Sutton, and I'm 42 years old. 1 year ago, I stood at the edge of my mother's open grave while my husband's voice poured out of my phone speaker, ordering me to leave her funeral. Put me before your mother. Come to my family gathering in an hour. 40 people heard it. The pastor heard it. My father heard it, and my father is not a man who shakes. But his hands started shaking over my mother's casket, and he said something so quiet I almost missed it. Let's give him what he wants. What the three of us did 3 hours later at my mother-in-law's dinner table, this town still talks about. And that was only the beginning, because my husband thought he knew exactly who he'd been married to for 21 years. He was about to find out he'd never met her. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women who kept the peace for decades finally tell you what that peace actually cost them. Grab your coffee and settle in, because this story starts in a cemetery and ends with an apron I only wear when I choose to. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to that Saturday morning. I buried my mother the way I'd done everything for 21 years, alone with a clipboard. I ordered the casket spray. I printed the programs. I set up 90 folding chairs in the church hall for the reception because the funeral home only provided 60. I loaded my mother's favorite hymns onto my phone because near the end, she'd asked me to play them at the graveside from the little speaker she kept on her porch. My husband John helped with none of it. John was across town at his mother's house, stringing patio lights for the annual party his family had thrown on that same Saturday for 30 years. He saw no reason a funeral should move it. The night before, while I ironed my black dress, he stood in the bedroom doorway with a beer and delivered his position like a manager reading a memo. Funerals are for the living, Laura. And the living I answer to are at my mother's. I remember thinking I should write that one down, because someday I'd want to remember the exact moment the last light went out. At 9 in the morning, the funeral director asked me gently whether Mr. Sutton would be riding in the family car. I said Mr. Sutton was detained. The man had been burying this town's mothers for 30 years. He knew what detained meant. He just nodded and closed the door, and we rode to the church, past the hardware store and the flower shop, and I stared the whole way at the empty seat beside me. Within the hour, that empty seat would follow me to the front pew, in front of everyone my mother had ever loved. To explain what happened at that grave, I have to show you a hook on a pantry door. My mother-in-law, Dolores, keeps 3 brass hooks by her kitchen pantry. The first holds her apron. The second holds her late husband's barbecue mitts, untouched since he passed. The third one, for 21 years, held mine. Nobody assigned it to me out loud. I was 19 when John first brought me to a Sutton Sunday dinner, and somewhere between the casserole and the pie, his mother handed me a dish towel, and that was that. I'd been an accountant once, 3 years at Herrick and Lowe over in Corvale. Reconciliations and payroll, and I was good. When Emma was born in 2006, John and his mother agreed, without consulting me, that Sutton wives didn't do other men's books. I gave my notice in 2007 and cried in the parking lot where no one could see. But here's the thing about women like me. We keep the skill even when they take the title. For 19 years, I did the books quietly at home for the florist, the lumberyard, and Dr. Pratt's dental office. Every check went into the joint account John managed, and John reviewed that account the way a warden reviews mail. In 2014, I opened a small business checking account in my own name. For client invoices, I told him, and he waved it off because money that small was beneath his attention. And every night, in a green cloth ledger I'd kept since my first job, I wrote it all down. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every dollar that went out wearing his name. Numbers were the one thing in that house that never lied to me. Remember that ledger. It matters later, more than anyone at that party could have guessed. My mother fought colon cancer for 14 months, and I was there for almost all of them. I drove her to treatment. I kept the pill sorter filled and the appointment calendar straight because that's the shape my love takes. Lists, schedules, full plates. My dad, Frank, 70 years old and married to her for 46 of them, handled the impossible part. He sat with her and stayed cheerful until he got to the truck. He gave me the cash envelope they kept for her medications because he said I was the one in the family who could make a dollar behave. I logged that envelope in the green ledger like everything else, which is how there came to be one small entry, July of 2025, that I wrote down and never mentioned. $4,000 out. Taken by John for the initiation deposit at the Cedar Glen Golf Club. He told me he'd put it back by Christmas. He told me his career required a membership and that my mother had more months than money. Anyway, I put my protest on the record and lost, the way I always lost. Quietly with the checkbook, still balanced. What I remember most from those 14 months isn't the hospital smell or the wigs we laughed about. It's my mother on the back porch, thin as a sparrow, watching me carry her soup tray, saying the sentence she'd been saving her whole life. "You've set the table your whole life, baby. Someday, sit down at one." I told her I would. I meant it the way you mean things you've never once done. She died on a Tuesday in June. The gathering was set for Saturday. Those two dates were about to collide, and only one man in town couldn't see it coming. The church was full by 10. My mother had spent 30 years running the hospital laundry and 40 years running the quilting circle, and both shifts showed up. My dad stood at the door in his one good suit, shaking hands like an oak tree gone hollow. Still standing, nothing left inside but the shape. Emma drove in from the university, 2 hours flat, and didn't let go of my hand through the whole service. She's 20, my girl, studying to be a teacher, and she kept scanning the doors for her father with an expression I recognized and hated. Bookkeeping. She was keeping his account. In the third pew sat Carol Weber, wife of Gordon Weber, who owns Weber Mechanical, the company where my husband had spent 11 years climbing toward the general manager job. Carol had quilted beside my mother every Thursday for a decade. Remember her too. Near the back, a silver-haired man I hadn't seen in 19 years quietly carried in extra folding chairs when the ushers ran short. James Holt. We'd worked audits together at Herrick and Lowe back when I was Laura Putnam. His mother was quilting circle. He caught my eye, nodded once the way you do at funerals, and that was all. My phone buzzed during the second hymn. A text from John. Running behind traffic. During the eulogy, it buzzed again. Wrap it up by 2. Gatherings at 4. I stood up after that and spoke about my mother's hands, and my voice held until the very last line, and I watched half the church break with me. Then we drove to the cemetery, 40 of us, under a sky so blue it felt hired for the occasion. And in my purse, my phone sat, like a small black landmine. Graveside was the small crowd, the real one, 40 people who had known my mother by her first name. My dad and I stood at the head of the grave, Emma between us, and I did the last thing on my mother's list. She'd asked for her hymns at the lowering. Not an organ, she'd said, just the porch speaker, like a Sunday morning at home. So I set her little speaker on the folding table by the flowers, paired my phone to it the way I'd done 100 times on that porch, and pressed play. In the garden rose up over the grass, tinny and sweet and completely her. People closed their eyes. My dad's chin came up the way it does when he's holding a load. The pastor said the words about dust, and 2 men in work gloves began to lower my mother into the ground, and the roses went down one at a time, each with somebody's whole face behind it. Emma dropped hers and whispered something I'll keep private. I was reaching for my own rose when the music cut out. For half a second, there was pure silence, just birds and the ropes creaking. Then the speaker, my mother's speaker, made the bright little chirp it makes when a call comes through, and the screen in my hand lit up with his name. John. Every reflex I owned said silence it, and my thumb, clumsy with grief, hit the wrong part of the glass. I answered him on my mother's porch speaker, at the edge of my mother's open grave, turned up loud enough to reach the back row of mourners. My husband cleared his throat. "Where are you?" His voice rolled out over the grave like a truck driving through a chapel, loud, irritated, echoing slightly off the headstones. "I told you the gathering starts at 4. The Webers are coming. I need my wife here. Not standing around a cemetery all afternoon." I couldn't move. 40 faces turned toward the little speaker among the funeral roses, and my husband's voice kept coming, each word laid down clean and public like coins on a counter. "For once in your life, put me before your mother. Come to my family gathering in an hour." The ropes had stopped creaking. The men in work gloves stood frozen, holding my mother halfway into the earth. I heard a shovel shift in the dirt pile. I heard someone's breath catch. I think it was the pastor. Carol Weber turned her face away, her shoulders rigid, and I understood with a strange floating clarity that she would remember this sound for the rest of her life. And so would every other person standing on that grass. My mother had been in the hospital laundry 30 years. She used to say, "You can tell everything about a man by what he does when he thinks no one important is watching." John thought no, one important was listening. He was on speaker in front of everyone who had ever loved me. I looked down at the phone in my hand. I did not scream and I did not explain because there is a kind of tired that arrives past anger, and it is very, very calm. "I heard you, John," I said. And I ended the call and the hymn came back on, soft and oblivious, right in the middle of the verse about walking and talking in the garden. Nobody moved. And then I saw my father's hands. And that is when this story truly begins. My father is a retired machinist. 41 years at the same shop, micrometers and lathes, a man who measures twice and speaks once. I had seen him angry maybe 3 times in my life, and every time it looked like this. Total stillness, except the hands. His hands were shaking like a man holding a live wire. He looked into the grave, at the casket holding the woman he'd loved since 1980, and he was quiet so long that the pastor started to say something merciful. Then my dad lifted his head, looked at me, and his voice came out level and even and terribly gentle. "Let's give him what he wants." The pastor blinked. Emma said, "Grandpa," furious tears still on her face. I said, "Dad." He took the phone out of my hand, careful with it like a part off a machine that had failed inspection, and handed it to Emma. "He wants his wife at that party," my dad said. "Then that's what he'll get. Exactly that. One more time." He straightened his suit jacket, nodded once to the pastor, and picked up the rose I had dropped. He laid it on my mother's casket himself. Then he said the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me at a funeral. "Trust me, Laurie, and wear the apron." I stood there between my mother's grave and my father's shaking hands, and I felt something shift in my chest, a lock or a gear. Something that had been stuck for 21 years, moving one tooth over. 40 people watched us walk to the car. None of them knew what my father was planning. To be honest, neither did I. But I got in, and I gave him the only answer I had left. "Okay, we buried my mother first, all of it. The last hymn, the handshakes, the casseroles loaded into trunks at the church hall. John's 1-hour deadline came and went while I hugged 40 people goodbye, and I did not hurry. It was past 4 when we finally drove the 20 minutes to Dolores's house in our funeral clothes, all 3 of us, my dad at the wheel of his Buick, jaw set like a sundae. Emma leaned forward from the back seat. "Grandpa, if you're about to fight him." "Nobody's fighting anybody," my dad said. "Your grandmother didn't raise brawlers." He glanced at me sideways, and there it was, faint but alive, the dry little spark my mother married him for. "Laurie, 21 years that man's treated you like staff. Today he ordered the staff to report to the party. He let that sit. So we're not going to fight him, sweetheart. We're going to resign." I looked out the window at the town going by, the pharmacy, the ball field, the church where I'd been married at 21, and I understood the whole shape of it at once, and my heart started pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He was offering me the door. But how I walked through it, that part belonged to me, and I already knew. No screaming, no scene he could retell later as proof I was hysterical. John wanted a wife who serves. He would get a full shift, executed to the letter, flawless to the last fork, and then he would learn what every employer learns eventually. The ones who never complain are the ones who are already gone. "One condition," I said. "Nobody says a word in there unless I do." My dad nodded like we'd shaken hands on. "Contract?" Emma looked back and forth between us, half terrified, half something else. I'd say proud. We pulled up to the curb behind 15 parked cars. Laughter floated over the fence with the smell of brisket. My hands were steady. I want that on the record. My hands were steady. 30-some Suttons and neighbors filled that backyard. Sundresses, seersucker, pastel, everything. And then the 3 of us coming through the gate in black like a bill arriving at a birthday party. Conversation dipped. John saw me from the drink table, and his face did a thing I'd watched for 2 decades. A flash of panic, gone in half a second, plastered over with the salesman's smile. "There she is," he called out, arms wide. "She made it, everybody." A few people clapped uncertainly, the way you clap when you can't tell if you're at a celebration or a hearing. Dolores appeared on the porch steps in her hostess apron, took in my funeral dress, my father, my daughter, and did not blink. 71 years old and not one blink. "Well," she said, "you're late, dear. The trays won't carry themselves." And there it was. The whole marriage, the whole family in one sentence served at room temperature. I walked past her into that kitchen I knew better than my own, and I took my apron off the third hook and I tied it over my funeral dress. Last time I told the hook. Then I worked. Deviled eggs out to the long table. Brisket sliced and fanned on the good platter. Iced tea refilled, lemon wedge, no seeds. I moved through that party in dead silence, precise as payroll, my black dress underneath the gingham like a signature under a contract, and I never once smiled. My dad and Emma did exactly what we'd agreed. They sat, 2 chairs, dead center, guests of honor at their own occupation, hands folded, touching nothing, watching me serve. It took the yard about 20 minutes to feel it. Laughter kept starting and dying, and John began to sweat. By the time I brought out the peach cobbler, the party had gone quiet enough to hear the ice melt. 30 people pretending to chat, every eye tracking the woman in funeral black moving through them with dessert plates, flawless and silent as a hearse. Dolores held court at the head of the long table, working hard at normal. John stood behind her chair with a beer he wasn't drinking, watching me the way you watch weather. I served the last plate. I set the coffee down by Dolores's cup, cream on the left, the way she'd trained me in 2005, and then, in front of the entire Sutton family, I reached back and untied the apron. I folded it once, twice, into a neat gingham square, and I laid it on the table in front of my mother-in-law like a delivered parcel. "Laura," she said, low, a warning. I didn't answer her. I was already working the wedding ring off my finger. 21 years. It left a groove like a lathe mark, and I placed it in the middle of the empty silver serving tray, where it rang once, small and bright, against the crumbs of my last shift. I slid the tray down the table to my husband. The whole yard heard it scrape. John stared at the ring, then at me, and his mouth opened, and what came out was pure instinct. The truest thing he ever said. "You don't get to quit on this family." I looked at him, the drink table, the lights he'd strung while I printed funeral programs, the mother watching me with her spine straight as rebar, and I felt 21 years close behind me like water over a stone. "You can't fire me, John. I don't work here anymore." Then I walked. My dad rose, and this is the part the town still tells. He pushed his chair in neatly, machinist to the end. Emma grabbed my purse. The gate clicked shut behind us, soft as a decimal point. By the time we reached the car, my phone had started to buzz. And it did, not stop for 3 days. I moved into my old bedroom at my dad's house that night with 1 suitcase and my mother's porch speaker. If you think the hard part was over, you've never left a man who owns all the keys. It took John exactly 2 days to remind me who'd been holding the money. Monday afternoon at the pharmacy counter, picking up my blood pressure refill, my debit card declined. The girl at the register, a former student of Emma's grade, tried it 3 times out of kindness. Declined. Tuesday, the banking app wouldn't take my password. Wednesday, John texted that the car, my car, the one I'd driven to chemo for 14 months, titled in his name like everything else, needed to come back for maintenance. He'd already put himself before everything else. Now it was just official. I stood in my dad's kitchen with a dead card and no car and a suitcase of funeral, and I want to be honest with you about that hour, because somebody listening needs it. I wobbled. It's one thing to lay a ring on a tray with your chin up. It's another to be 42 years old and locked out of your own life by a man who is very good at looking reasonable in front of tellers and pastors and judges. Then I remembered the account he'd never bothered to sneer at. My little business checking. Invoices from the florist, the lumberyard, and doctor, Pratt, deposited faithfully since 2014. Balance, $3,900. Not much next to a man with the house, the cars, and 11 years at Weber Mechanical. But it was mine in my name, out of his reach. And let me tell you what that kind of money is really worth. If you have ever stood at a register with a card you already knew would decline because someone else decided what you deserved that week, tell me about it in the comments. I read them, and so do 1,000 women who thought they were the only one. And hit subscribe because what John did next, even his own mother couldn't defend. Emma video called me from her dorm on Thursday, laptop light on her face, and said what she'd been saying since the graveside. "Mom, I'm with you all the way." 20 minutes after we hung up, her father called her. He was warm. At first, she told me. The concerned dad voice, the one he pulls out for teachers and traffic cops. Then, right before the goodbye, he set the hook. "If your mother keeps up this little show, sweetheart, I may have to rethink some things." The college fund's in my name, you know. Her voice was still shaking when she repeated it to me. That fund held 4 years of tuition we'd saved since she was born. And he was right. Legally, it sat in his name, with him as the owner. He hadn't threatened me, he'd priced me. This is what I mean when I say men like John don't lose their temper. They open negotiations. He'd found the one thing I'd crawl back for, and he set it on the table with the safety off. So the next morning, I did the most radical thing a woman like me can do. I hired my own advice. Patricia Ray's, family law, one town over in Corvale. Gray streak, reading glasses on a chain, a handshake like a door closing. Her retainer was $500. I paid it from the business account and watched 19 years of quiet invoices turn into A. War chest. Patricia listened to the whole story without a single note of surprise, which told me how many times she'd heard it. Then she took off the reading glasses and asked me the only question that ever mattered. What do you have on paper? And for the first time since my mother died, I smiled. Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock, I drove my dad's Buick to 214 Maple Row. Still legally my home, Patricia reminded me. Whatever John had done to the passwords, he'd be at Weber Mechanical until 6. I let myself in through the kitchen door and stood, a minute in the house where I'd raised my daughter. It smelled like his cologne and takeout. The counters, for the record, were filthy. The staff had resigned. I wasn't there for memories. Bottom drawer by the stove, under the takeout menus and the dead batteries, exactly where it had lived for 2 decades, because John never opened a drawer he couldn't spend. The green cloth ledger. 21 years of our life in my handwriting, month by month. Every deposit from my bookkeeping, every mortgage payment, every check to Emma's school, and one small entry from July 2025. Ink A, little heavier than the rest. $4,000 out of my mother's medication envelope, initials JS, destination Cedar Glen Golf Club. Beside the ledger, I stacked the tax folders and the printout of the envelope tally I'd kept for my dad. My hands were quick, my heart was loud, and I was almost to the door when I heard tires in the driveway, not the diesel growl of John's truck. Lighter. I looked through the curtain and my stomach dropped an inch. Dolores's sedan, nosing in behind the Buick, blocking me neat as a chess move. My mother-in-law has had a key to this house since the week we closed on it. She'd insisted, and John had handed it over without asking me. I heard it turn in the front lock. I had the ledger in a grocery bag, 1 exit, and 30 seconds, so I did what I do best under pressure. I put the kettle on. Dolores stopped in the kitchen doorway and took inventory. Me, the kettle, the grocery bag on the counter with the green spine showing. She's a smart woman. People miss that about her, because she weaponizes doilies, but she reads a room like an auditor, too domestic. Are you robbing the house, dear? Collecting my paperwork, I said, chamomile or nothing, that's what's left. We stood on opposite sides of that kitchen island like 2 countries with a long border, and she studied me. He won't forgive you, she said. The party, the little performance with the tray. Sutton men don't forgive public things. I know, I said. I'm not asking. Something moved behind her eyes. I'd call it respect if the word didn't embarrass us both. She looked at the ledger's spine and I braced. Instead, she said, quiet and flat like, a fact of whether every marriage runs on someone's back, dear. Mine ran on mine. Yours ran on yours. That's not cruelty. That's how a house stays standing. Then even quieter, almost to the window. The day I buried my father, I had a roast on Harold's table by 6. Nobody asked me either. The kettle clicked off. Neither of us moved to pour. For one strange moment, I saw her clearly. 23 years old in 1978, apron on, grief folded and put away, standing at a stove because the alternative had never once been offered. The same chain, one, link older. Then the moment shut like a screen door. Take your book and go, she said. I took it. And here is the piece I didn't learn until much later. She never told John I'd been there. I've stopped trying to decide what that was. Mercy has a quiet cousin, and its name is recognition. Here's something they don't teach you about small towns. News doesn't travel by phone here, it travels by casserole. By the second week, everyone in Millbrook had heard the graveside call, and I mean heard it in detail, down to the echo. 40 mourners is 40 broadcasting stations. The checkout line at the market went quiet and kind when I walked up. At the ball field, 2 mothers I barely knew touched my shoulder like a church blessing. Ed at the barber shop, who has cut my dad's hair since Carter was president, reportedly refused to take John's usual booking on account of being suddenly very busy forever. I want to be clear about what I was doing during all this, because it matters to how the story ends. Nothing. I gave no interviews at the bake sale. I corrected no details in the church parking lot. Patricia had advised silence, and silence suited me. But the truth is, I didn't need to say a word, and that was the beautiful, terrible engine of the whole thing. There was only one version of the story, and it was his, in his voice, at full volume, over my mother's grave. Put me before your mother. He'd published his own confession to the exact 40 people a man in a reputation business can least afford. One of them sent my father a sympathy card that week. Cream paper, tidy blue ink, Carol Weber. My dad read it twice and passed it to me across the breakfast table without a word. Under the printed condolences, she'd written a single line. Ruth raised a lady. I keep it in the ledger now, at the July 2025 page, like a pressed flower. That Friday, John called my dad's landline and asked, very civil, to come talk like adults. My dad looked at me. I said, let him come. He came Saturday morning in the good blazer, carrying flowers from the grocery store, and performed concern at me across my father's porch rail. This was the grief madness offer, and I'd known. It was coming, I wasn't myself. Losing my mother had unbalanced me, everyone understood. No one would hold it against me, come home and we'd say no more about it. I forgive you, he said, actually opening his arms. Come home? I told him evenly that I was already home, and I watched the performance shut down like a fair ride when the money runs out. The flowers dropped to his side. The voice dropped with them. You'll be broke in a month, he said. Look at you. You're a 42-year-old waitress with a calculator. You are nothing without me, and every person in this town knows it. The screen door opened behind me. My dad came out with his coffee. 70 years old, calm as a Tuesday, and looked at John the way he used to look at a part that had failed inspection twice. Funny thing, my dad said. At the cemetery, I told her to give you what you want. She did. You wanted first place, son. You got it. He took a sip. Now you get to find out what first place looks like in an empty room. John left rubber on a residential street, pulling out. That evening, Dolores's sedan pulled up, and she handed me a still warm casserole and an ultimatum in the same motion. Come home by Sunday or you're nothing to this family. I set the dish gently back in her hands. Monday, a letter arrived from Bricker and Associates, the loudest divorce firm in the county. My husband had lawyered up. Good, said Patricia when I called her. Now pray he stays angry. Angry men sign things, while the lawyers circled. I did something for the first time in 19 years. I applied for a job under my own name. Herrick and Lowe, the Corvale accounting firm where I'd started at 20, had a junior staff opening. The kind of posting meant for somebody's granddaughter fresh out of school, not a woman with a 19-year gap on her resume and a funeral in her recent history. The office manager gave me the standard skills test. 90 minutes, bank reconciliations and payroll scenarios, and set me in the little glass conference room with a bottled water and visible pity. I finished in 40 minutes. She checked it twice, then went and got a partner, and the partner asked carefully where I'd been. Working, a private household, I said. 21 years, no sick days. On my way out through the lobby, a silver-haired senior manager looked up from the copier, and 19 years fell off the calendar. James Holt. He didn't make it strange or soft. He said, Laura, you trained half this floor on reconciliations. To the office manager more than to me, nodded like the matter was settled and went back to his copies. The call came the next morning. Junior staff accountant, $21 an hour, start Monday. I sat in my dad's kitchen and looked at that offer letter. For a long time, $21 an hour is less than I was worth. It was also more than I'd been paid in 19 years, which was nothing at all. A number I'd entered in the ledger every month, a zero with my whole life inside it. My dad read the letter, put it on the refrigerator under a magnet like a spelling test, and said, Putnam's work. Then he fried eggs badly. That part of the story comes next. Here's what starting over at 42 actually looks like. For anyone keeping notes. Alarm at 5:45, coffee with my dad, in a kitchen that still had my mother's handwriting on the flour jar. The 25-minute drive to Corvale in the Buick. Then, after 2 months of paychecks, my own car. A gray Corolla, $800, 190,000 miles, bought with cash and titled in one name only. And I'm not ashamed to tell you, I sat in the dealership lot and pressed my forehead to that cheap steering wheel like it was an altar rail. At the office, I was the oldest junior accountant in the building. correcting spreadsheets built by juniors who'd been in grade school the year I quit. I loved every hour of it. But the part of that summer I hold on to isn't the job. It's my father, 70 years old, deciding that if his daughter was going to work, somebody was going to feed her. The man had operated a lathe for 4 decades and could not crack an egg to save his life. He learned, burned the first dozen, swore at the pan in machinist language, kept at it like a man being paid by the yoke. And one morning in August, he set a plate in front of me, eggs, toast cut on, the diagonal like my mother used to, and said, "Sit down, Laurie. You've got 10 minutes. Eat while it's hot." I cried into those eggs. He pretended not to see, which is the same thing as holding someone if you're from here. 21 years I had cooked for a man who never once made me a plate. It took my father one summer and a second-hand skillet to show me the difference between being needed and being loved. Meanwhile, across the county line, word came drifting out of Weber Mechanical through Emma's old babysitter who worked the front desk. Gordon, Weber was finally retiring, and the general manager decision was, quote, under review. John found out where I worked, of course. In a county this size, he probably knew my parking spot before I did. On a Thursday in September, he was leaning against his truck next to the Corolla when I came out at 5. Arms crossed, sunglasses on top of his head. The pose of a man who has rehearsed being casual. "So, this is the big new life," he said. He looked at the office glass behind me, then at my sensible shoes, and gave the laugh. "He saves for waiters. I don't work here anymore," he said, in a squeaky little voice that was supposed to be mine. Cute line. Did your daddy write it for you? You think a spreadsheet job makes you somebody, Laura? And I discovered, standing in that parking lot, that he had lost the thing he'd always counted on. The wince. He'd say a thing shaped like a slap, and the old me would flinch and manage him. Smooth it, soften it, apologize for the weather. The new me had done payroll all afternoon and wanted dinner. "It makes me the payroll, John," I said. "Level as a spirit level. That's more than you ever let me be." His jaw worked. He came off the truck and his voice went up into that register the cemetery would have recognized. "You ungrateful. After everything. Do you have any idea what people are saying about me?" And behind me, I heard the office door open. 2 of the juniors and the office manager, out for the evening, slowing on the sidewalk, watching. John saw them, and I watched my husband see himself. A big man shouting at a woman by a used Corolla, in public in daylight, 6 weeks before the Weber family would choose its next general manager. He got in the truck and left without another word. Friday, the mediation notice arrived. Thursday next, 9 in the morning. Both parties and counsel. Patricia called me that night with one instruction. Bring the book. Mediation happened in a beige conference room in Corvale with bad coffee and a mediator named Mr. Ellis, who had perfected the face of a man surprised by nothing. John arrived in the good blazer with Bricker, who talked like a leaf blower. Their opening position, delivered in a binder. John keeps the house, no spousal support. And if we didn't like it, they'd be delighted to spend 3 years litigating, quote, Mrs. Sutton's abandonment of the marital home. That's the actual phrase they hung on a woman who left a party where she'd been serving cobbler in funeral black. Patricia didn't argue. Arguing is for people without paperwork. She opened the green ledger to the tabbed pages and slid copies across the table, one section at a time, calm as dealing solitaire. 19 years of household income from my bookkeeping, deposited into an account in his name, every mortgage payment sourced. And then the July 2025 page, side by side with the bank statement she'd subpoenaed to match it. $4,000 out of a dying woman's medication envelope, initials JS, destination Cedar Glen. Nobody shouted. That's the thing about arithmetic. It doesn't raise its voice. It just sits there being true. John looked at that page, and his face went the color of the folder it came in. And Bricker asked for a recess. And then came the moment I haven't told anyone until now. The lawyers stepped out. The mediator went for coffee. And for the first time since the graveside, it was just the 2 of us and a beige table. John stared at his hands. When he spoke, the salesman was gone. What was left sounded almost young. "If you're not there," he said, "who runs it? The house. Mom Sundays, all of it. What am I supposed to be?" For one breath, I saw the boy they'd built this man out of, and I almost pitied him. Then he straightened his cuffs and got it back. "Forget it. See you in court." Patricia drove me home. At the light, she said, "He'll bleed you slowly now, unless he suddenly needs something from you. She tapped the wheel. Pray he needs something. He needed something. Gordon Weber had set his retirement gala for the third Saturday of October at the Hartwell Hotel in Corvale. The whole county invited, and the new general manager to be introduced from the podium. 60 years of Weber Mechanical passing to its next steward. And Weber Mechanical, you have to understand, doesn't sell heating and cooling. It sells trust to families in their kitchens, the van you let into your garage. Gordon hired for character and promoted for character, and his wife had been quilting with my mother for 10 years, and my husband's character had recently premiered, in his own voice, to 40 witnesses at a funeral. John was bleeding image in the one company where image was the job. So the offer came, first through Bricker, in Lawyer Weather. My client proposes a comprehensive settlement, contingent upon Mrs. Sutton's participation in certain family and professional obligations through October. Patricia read it twice and said a word I won't repeat. Then, near midnight, my phone lit up. John, not the cemetery voice, the other one, the one from 23 years ago at the county fair, soft and reasonable and warm as a heat lamp. One night, Laura, the gala, come as my wife. Smile, wear the blue dress, stand next to me for 3 hours, and Monday morning I sign everything, house sold, we split it clean. Emma's fund locked up safe for her, all of it done by Christmas. One night and you're free. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, listening to my husband negotiate for my presence the way he'd negotiate for a fleet discount. And the strangest calm settled over me, because at last the whole marriage stood in the light where I could see its actual shape. It had never been a marriage. It was an appearance contract, and my wages were the apron, and here was the renewal notice dressed as a favor. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up and stared at the ceiling until dawn, because here is the truth. It was a good deal. That's exactly what made it dangerous. I want you to understand that every sensible voice in my life told me to take it. Patricia first, because that's her job. If he contests this thing wall to wall, you're looking at $30,000 in fees, a year of your life minimum, and no guarantees. 3 hours in a ballroom buys it all back. I've watched women trade more for less. My dad, second, and this one cost him. He stood drying dishes a long time and finally said, "Your mother wouldn't want you bleeding money for pride." A pause. Would she? And the question mark told me he didn't believe his own sentence, but 70 years of practicality made him say it. Then Emma, Sunday night, her voice small over the phone in a way it hadn't been since she was 8. "Mom, it's one night. I've done the math on what that house is worth. I can't be the reason. I can't ask you to lose the house over one night." My girl, bookkeeping again, this time with herself in the debit column. I told her the fund and the house were my worry, and her only job was midterms. And after we hung up, I sat in the dark, completely and utterly alone with it, which I understand now is where every real decision is made. And because they were all correct, that's what nobody tells you about moments like this. The wrong choice arrives with excellent references. It was one night. It was 3 hours. One dress, one smile I'd manufactured 10,000 times before, cheap at the price. Late that night, I opened the closet to hang my work blouse, and there it was, waiting behind the funeral dress. Navy blue, knee-length, the tags already off. I'd bought it 2 weeks earlier, the day after his midnight call. Some part of me, the part raised at a stove, the part that kept everyone fed and everything smooth, had already said yes, and that, more than John, more than Dolores, more than any Sutton living or dead, is the enemy I'd been fighting my whole life. The night before the gala, I sat at my dad's kitchen table with 3 objects in front of me, like a woman laying out evidence for a jury of one. The green ledger. My mother's apron, off its kitchen hook since June and never yet unfolded, and Carol Weber's cream-colored card. I opened the ledger to the first page, September 2005. My handwriting at 21, careful round loops, so eager to get our brand new life exactly right. Groceries, rent, a line item that stopped me. Gift, Dolores serving tray, and the price. Because even then, even in the honeymoon, I was already accounting for that family's silver. 21 years of pages between that girl and me. She thought the ledger was a love letter, that keeping everything balanced was the same as keeping everyone safe. Every page after her proved something different, and I had never once let myself read the proof. My mother's voice came to me then the way it does. Not mystical, just remembered. Porch warm. You've set the table your whole life, baby. Someday, sit down at one. And sitting there, I finally did the one piece of math nobody had asked me for. The house was worth a number. The legal war was worth a number. But its one night had been the price of admission my entire life. One night, it's just Sunday dinner. One night, it's just the gathering, the fundraiser, the client barbecue. String enough one nights together, and you get 21 years and a woman at a graveside holding a phone, being ordered to report to work. The dress was not a dress. It was the apron with a zipper. Here's where I'm supposed to tell you I burned it in the yard. The truth is stranger. The gala started at 7. At 6:15, I put on the navy dress and my earrings and my good coat. My father watched me pick up the car keys, and God bless that man, he never said a word. I drove toward Corvale in the navy dress with my hands at 10 and 2, past the ball field dark for the season, past Herrick and Low, one light on in the cleaning crew's window. The Hartwell came up on the right, glowing, like a struck match. Gold light in every window, valise jogging. The Weber Mechanical logo projected 2 stories tall on the ballroom wall, and through the tall glass of the lobby I saw him. John in the tuxedo I'd picked up from the cleaners 100 times, standing alone by the fountain, checking his watch, adjusting his tie, arranging his face into the smile, scanning the drive for headlights. For me, the staff reporting for the last shift of her life. I want to be honest. Because you've come this far with me, I slowed down. 21 years of muscle. Memory reached for that turn signal, like a hand reaching for a hot pan it's been trained not to feel. And for 2 full seconds, the entire settlement, the house, the fees, the clean, easy Christmas, sat in the passenger seat asking to be chosen. Then I drove past. Simple as that and hard as that. Past the valet, past the gold light, past the man rehearsing his marriage in a hotel lobby. And the road went dark and quiet again, and my heart was going like a hammer. And I laughed. Alone in a $800 Corolla in my good earrings, I laughed like a woman let out of a building. At the next red light, I picked up my phone and typed the message I'd been drafting without knowing it since the 3rd brass hook in 2005. No, I'm done being proof that you're a good man. I hit send, set the phone face down on the seat, and drove back to Millbrook. To the cemetery, while it began to buzz and buzz and buzz. The cemetery gate stays open until 9, and the groundskeeper, who'd known my mother, had stopped pretending not to recognize my car. I parked on the gravel loop near her row and called Patricia, who, because I had asked her that afternoon to stay near her phone, answered on the 2nd ring. I'm not at the gala, I said. I know, she said. It's 7:40 and my phone hasn't exploded. Talk to me. Draft it tonight, I said. He keeps the house, all the equity. I'm done fighting for it. In exchange, Emma's college fund gets locked for Emma, ironclad, in the agreement. My retirement account stays mine. My name back, Putnam, and his signature inside 2 weeks. Dissolution. No trial, send it. To Bricker in the morning. The line went quiet while she did the math she's paid to do. Laura, that's $60,000 of equity you're handing him. As your attorney, I need you to hear that number out loud. I looked through the windshield at the new headstone, pale in the dark. Ruth Putnam, 1957 to 2026. The grass just starting to knit over her. It's not $60,000, I said. It's a receipt. 21 years, paid in full. And I never have to stand in a ballroom smiling for my life again. Send it. She was quiet another second, and then she said something no one that expensive says lightly. It's been an honor, Mrs., and stopped herself. MS, Putnam. The consent form came to my phone by email while I sat there. I signed it with my finger by dome light, 12 feet from my mother. The world's smallest, most expensive signature. Then I got out and stood at her grave in my navy dress in the October cold and told her the news out loud, because some conversations don't work silently. I finally quit, Mama. The wind moved the oak. At 9:40, back in the car, my phone lit up with a text from Emma. All capitals. Mom, are you seeing this? I was not at the gala. Everything I know arrived the way all Millbrook news arrives. Emma's roommate's cousin was waitressing the Hartwell that night, and by Monday the town had assembled the evening like a quilt, every square signed. Here is what they saw. John alone at the company table, the empty chair beside him wearing its little gold bow. John checking the lobby between courses. John on his 3rd drink when the lights came down, and Gordon Weber, 66 years old, thanked the county for 60 years of trust and introduced the next general manager of Weber Mechanical. Ray Delgado, 15 years in the field, coached half the town's little league, married to a nurse. The room stood up for Ray. One man didn't. And then, at the coat check, while the band played the last set, my husband walked up to his retiring boss and asked why. Loudly. Grabbed the great man's lapel, they say, and there are disputes about that detail, but none about the volume. After everything I gave this company, the music had just stopped between songs. Everyone heard it, and into that silence stepped Carol Weber, in her good pearls, my mother's quilting partner of 10 years, and she answered him in a voice witnesses describe as gentle, which somehow made it worse. "We heard what you give, John." The whole cemetery heard it. Security walked him out through the glass doors, the same tall glass I'd watched him through 3 hours earlier while he rehearsed his smile, and the valet stand pretended to be very busy. And that was the end of 11 years at Weber Mechanical, though the paperwork would take another week to say so. He had demanded to be put first, and the county had finally, unanimously, agreed on exactly where he stood. The settlement came back signed in 9 days. No counters, no theatrics. A man losing his job needs liquid cash more than leverage, and Bricker, whatever his volume settings, can read a room that's on fire. Emma's fund locked, hers untouchable, written into the agreement in language Patricia described as concrete with rebar in it. My retirement mine. My name. Mine again. The house and its $60,000 of equity his. A fact I have never once regretted and never once called cheap. The Monday after the gala, Weber Mechanical and John Sutton, quote, parted ways over a company event, plus an email he'd sent Gordon at 1 in the morning that nobody has ever quoted directly, which in this town means it was unquotable. Dolores closed the door. Her son had made the family ridiculous in front of the Webers, the pastor, the county, and Dolores can forgive cruelty a lot faster than she can forgive spectacle. The Sunday dinners went on, I hear, but John's chair went the way of my apron hook. His sisters were suddenly busy. The gathering photos that Christmas, someone showed me, had a gap in them like a pulled tooth. My dad read the news of John's departure in the Millbrook Courier's business notes, folded the paper the way he folds everything in halves, and delivered the final meaning of the sentence he'd said over my mother's grave. He wanted to matter more than everything. My dad set the paper down. Now he does. He's all he has left. That week, I put the green ledger in a box on the closet shelf. Its work was finished. Mine had 1 page left. The dissolution went through the week before Thanksgiving in a courtroom the size of a Sunday school class. 20 minutes, a few questions from the judge. Yes and yes and yes. John came in a suit that fit a man 10 pounds ago and looked, for the first time since the county fair 23 years back, small. On the courthouse steps, in the first thin snow of the season, he stopped me. No audience left to perform for, just us, which by then was the only version of him I could stand. "You've ruined me," he said. "You know that," not shouting, almost asking. I looked at him and searched. Honestly searched. For the anger I'd been assured I would feel at this moment, and found something quieter and much older. "No, John," I said. "I just stopped catering it." And I went down the steps to where my daughter was waiting with the Corolla's heater running. I signed the last page that day as Laura Putnam, and my signature came out in careful round loops, the handwriting of a 21-year-old girl who'd been waiting inside the ledger all this time. Here is what I'll say about the drive home, because you've earned the whole truth. I grieved. You can grieve a marriage and still never want it back. Both things are true at once and nobody warns you. 21 years is 21 years. I let it be sad the whole 9 miles. Then my dad met us at the door and the porch light was on and the kitchen smelled like burned eggs and I was done being sad. 1 June later. A year, almost to the day, after I buried my mother. Here is where you'd find me on a Sunday. A rented duplex on Birch Street with a kitchen, window that gets the afternoon light. A promotion, staff accountant now, with my own small stack of clients who bring me shoeboxes of receipts like offerings. And a table, my table. Sunday dinner at my house runs on one law, posted nowhere and enforced always. Everybody carries their own plate. My dad brings a loaf of bread he baked himself. The 4th attempt was the first edible one, and he'd want you to know the count. Emma, home for the summer after her 2nd year, brings a salad and her grandmother's laugh. Nobody wears an apron unless they feel like baking, And my mother's hangs by the window, faded gingham in the good light, and some Saturdays I tie it on and make her apple pie. Because an apron you choose is just soft armor for people who love butter. Last month, my dad showed up with a kitchen chair in the truck bed. My mother's chair, from the old house, the one at the head of their table. He set it at the head of mine and said, "Your mother saved you a seat." Across town, I hear Dolores's Sundays go on. Same silver, same hooks and a nephew's, young bride now learning which one is hers. The chain didn't break everywhere. It just doesn't run through me anymore. And it will never run through Emma, who, when anyone demands too much of anyone at my table, grins and hands down the family ruling. We don't work here anymore. And James, because some of you have been wondering, and my Emma teases me that I blush at break room coffee. It was months of exactly that. Coffee by the copier, spreadsheets, his terrible puns about depreciation. Then, eventually, coffee on a Saturday at the diner on the square. Both of us early. He's a widower. He knows what it costs to sit down across from someone new. I'll tell you the moment I knew he was different, and it wasn't flowers. He asked me where I wanted to eat, a small nothing question. And when I started to say whatever's easiest, the way I'd said it for 21 years, he just smiled and let the silence sit there, patient as a porch. He asked what I wanted. Then he did something nobody had done in decades. He waited for the answer. I'm in no hurry, and neither is he. I was a whole woman before that man ever bought me a coffee, and he'd be the first to tell you so. That's the only kind of love I take now, the kind that waits. I still go out to the cemetery on Sundays before dinner, with roses from my own little yard now, and I sit on the grass by the pale headstone and give my mother the week's news, like I used to on her porch. This June, 1 year out, I finally gave her the only report she ever actually wanted from me. I put someone first, Mama. Me, the oak moved. The town hummed somewhere behind me, casseroles in transit, and the tables full anyway. Dad, Emma, pie when I feel like it. I sat down. Mama, you'd like the chair. On the way out, I passed the groundskeeper, who tipped his cap, and I drove home with the windows down to a house where nobody was waiting to be served, and everybody was waiting for me. If there's one thing I'd carve over every kitchen door in this country, it's this. If love only counts when you're carrying the tray, it was never love. It was labor, and you are allowed to resign. That's my story. One phone call on a speaker, one quiet sentence from my father, and an apron I only wear when I choose to. If someone you love has spent years serving a table she's never been invited to sit at, share this story with her today. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done at that graveside. I read everyone. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next.